should be able to control their borders. What I think is shocking is that we have MPs in Labour who other countries will not allow through.
And they were trying to get into Israel. Obviously, they are particularly cross about the way that Israel has been behaving in Gaza.
2 Labour MPs with a documented history of anti-Israel propaganda were denied entry to Israel. And somehow this became about race and gender. The mental gymnastics Narinder Kaur displayed on the Jeremy Vine show weren't just misleading. They were a textbook example of deflection tactics used to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. In this analysis, we'll break down exactly why Israel had every right to control its borders against politicians who've repeatedly supported their enemies. The real question isn't why these MPs were deported. It's why Narinder and others are so quick to cry discrimination, rather than addressing the actual behaviours and statements that led to this entirely predictable outcome. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Let's examine the spectacle that unfolded on the Jeremy Vine show, where Narinder Kaur framed the deportation of 2 Labour MPs from Israel as a clear-cut case of discrimination.
Banned and deported. Two women.
Oh, forget that they're women. That's a ridiculous argument. The fact
there was a lot of misogyny and racism.
They got the right.
With righteous indignation, Kaur insisted that these MPs were targeted specifically because they were women of colour. It was quite the performance, passionate, emotive, and delivered with unwavering conviction. But conviction alone doesn't make something true. When pressed for evidence that race or gender played any role in Israel's decision, Kaur's response was telling. Rather than providing concrete examples or official statements from Israeli authorities that would support her discrimination narrative, she pivoted swiftly to emotionally charged rhetoric. This is a classic deflection technique.
Kemi Badenoch's view, really on it. I do believe that Israel do have a right to allow who they want into their country and try and keep it safe.
When facts aren't on your side, appeal to emotion and moral outrage instead. What's particularly concerning is how readily the media amplified this discrimination narrative without applying even basic journalistic scrutiny. Headlines across various outlets immediately echoed the framing that these MPs were victims of prejudice, despite Israel's clear statements that their decisions were based on security concerns, and the MPs' past statements regarding Israel. The rush to embrace the discrimination angle reveals more about our media landscape than it does about what actually happened. This isn't Kaur's first foray into recasting political disputes as identity-based discrimination.
2 Labour MPs in question that did get deported are no saints, by the way. They're not exactly people that have Israel's best bet.
During the Brexit debates, she similarly characterised criticism of certain pro-EU politicians as motivated by prejudice rather than policy disagreements. When challenged about the content of their actual statements at the time, she employed the same rhetorical techniques we witnessed on the Jeremy Vine show: emotional appeals, implied moral superiority, and a convenient sidestepping of substantive issues. The selective outrage becomes even more apparent when we consider how little attention is paid to similar cases involving politicians who don't fit the preferred narrative. Just last year, 3 Conservative MPs were denied entry to China due to their stance on Hong Kong. Yet this barely registered in the news cycle. Similarly, multiple white male politicians have faced entry restrictions to various countries based on their political positions, including a former UK MEP banned from entering New Zealand over his immigration views, and an American congressman barred from Russia for his support of sanctions. The troubling pattern emerges clearly. When entry denials happen to politicians who don't check certain identity boxes, they're treated as routine diplomatic tensions. But when they happen to women of colour, suddenly the only possible explanation is discrimination, regardless of what those individuals might have said or done.
If you look at the reasons why the Israeli government has given for why they're not letting them in, they don't believe that they're going to comply with their laws.
This selective application of outrage raises uncomfortable questions about intellectual honesty in our public discourse. If Israel's decision was truly motivated by racial or gender bias, shouldn't we expect to see a pattern of such behaviour directed at other politicians sharing those characteristics? Yet numerous female politicians of various backgrounds regularly visit Israel without incident. The discrimination narrative simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny. What's most revealing is what Kaur and others advancing this narrative seem determined not to discuss: the actual statements and actions of these MPs that might have legitimately influenced Israel's decision. Their persistent refusal to engage with this aspect suggests they're well aware that examining the substance of the MPs' past comments would undermine their preferred framing. The fact is, sovereign nations routinely make entry decisions based on security assessments and the past statements of foreign politicians. When a politician has repeatedly expressed sentiments that a nation views as hostile to its interests or security, restriction of entry is neither unusual nor inherently discriminatory. It's standard diplomatic practice worldwide. By insisting that racial and gender discrimination must be the explanation, despite the absence of evidence supporting this claim and the existence of a much more plausible alternative explanation, Kaur reveals her argument for what it truly is: a calculated attempt to reframe a political conflict through the lens of identity politics. This approach doesn't merely distort the specific situation at hand, it trivialises genuine instances of discrimination by equating them with ordinary political disagreements. The rush to claim discrimination obscures the inconvenient paper trail these Labour MPs left behind them. When we strip away the emotional theatrics and identity politics, what remains is a documented history of anti-Israel statements so concerning that any sovereign nation would reasonably exercise caution. This isn't about race or gender, it's about the digital fingerprints Absalam Mohammed and Yuan Yang left across social media, parliamentary records, and public appearances that Israel simply couldn't ignore.
At their heart, and actually have got a history of, pushing anti-Israel propaganda and swaying more towards Hamas.
Let's examine what Narinder Kaur so conveniently omitted from her passionate defence. In the months preceding their planned visit, both Mohammed and Yang established a clear pattern of promoting narratives that undermined Israel's legitimacy.
A couple of places. Firstly, the border of Israel, and there's a Labour MP called Absalam Mohammed and another one called Yuan Yang, and those are the two Labour MPs there in the Mail. Okay.
Their social media accounts reveal a troubling timeline of increasingly hostile rhetoric, not merely criticising specific Israeli policies, which would be perfectly legitimate, but questioning the nation's fundamental right to security measures. What's particularly striking is how Kaur's discrimination claim diverts attention from the MP's well-documented support for organisations with direct ties to Hamas. Rather than acknowledging this inconvenient reality, she crafted a narrative that portrays them solely as victims of prejudice. The facts tell a different story, one where Israel made a sovereign decision based on legitimate security concerns rather than immutable characteristics. When pressed about why Israel might deny entry to these MPs, Kaur deflected, preferring instead to double down on accusations of discrimination. Yet the question remains shockingly simple. Why is it so crazy and shocking that a country doesn't let two people in that have no-voiced and went against their narrative? This isn't some radical concept in international relations. It's standard practice among nations facing security threats. Israel's border control policies aren't exceptional when compared with other democratic nations. The United States routinely denies entry to foreign politicians deemed hostile to American interests. Australia maintains strict sovereignty over who crosses its borders, particularly regarding those who have expressed views counter to national security. These practices aren't considered discriminatory. They're recognised as legitimate exercises of national sovereignty.
And they were trying to get into Israel. Obviously, they are particularly cross about the way that Israel has been behaving in Gaza.
What's particularly revealing is that Israeli officials provided specific justifications for their decision. They didn't cite race or gender, they pointed directly to the MP's history of statements and affiliations. This wasn't a snap judgment, but a considered response to a documented pattern of concerning behaviour. The officials made clear that their decision was based on the MP's actions, not their identities.
Should be able to control their borders. What I think is shocking is that we have MPs in Labour who other countries will not allow through.
A distinction Kaur deliberately blurred. Instead of engaging with this substantive explanation, Kaur immediately reached for what the host described as her predictable use of the race card and the gender card. This rhetorical manoeuvre serves a clear purpose. It shifts the conversation away from the MP's actual statements and positions, focusing instead on immutable characteristics that make any criticism appear prejudiced rather than principled. The deeper issue here is how identity politics is being weaponized to shield public figures from legitimate scrutiny. By immediately framing Israel's decision through the lens of discrimination, Kaur effectively shut down any meaningful discussion of the MP's anti-Israel positions. This tactic doesn't just distort this specific incident, it undermines our ability to have honest conversations about international relations more broadly. What makes this particularly egregious is that it diminishes genuine instances of discrimination. When race and gender are invoked as shields against criticism regardless of context, we lose the ability to recognise and address actual prejudice. The resulting boy who cried wolf effect damages societal trust and makes addressing real instances of discrimination more difficult. The evidence suggests that Israel's decision was based on the MP's own words and actions, their alleged promotion of anti-Israel and pro-Hamas propaganda, rather than anything to do with their personal identities. This isn't speculation. It's the logical conclusion drawn from examining the full context that Kaur so carefully avoided discussing.
MPs banned and deported from Israel, and she shares the view that it is an absolute disgrace.
Israel, like any sovereign nation, maintains the right to determine who crosses its borders. When politicians have repeatedly expressed hostility toward a country's existence, questioning that country's decision to deny them entry requires a willful blindness to geopolitical realities. The focus, as the host rightly argued, should remain on the MP's actions and statements, rather than characteristics entirely irrelevant to the situation at hand. Let's take a step back and consider what's really at stake here.
And done nothing wrong. Just look at their history, and that's probably give you a reason as to why Israel did not let them in over the weekend and ban and deport.
When debates about international relations are reduced to identity politics, we lose something crucial: the ability to engage with complex geopolitical realities on their own terms. The obsession with framing the Labour MP's incident purely through a discrimination lens effectively derailed any meaningful examination of their problematic statements and actions. This pattern extends beyond this single incident. By prioritising identity-based narratives over substantive policy discussions, we create intellectual blind spots that weaken our collective understanding of world affairs. The unfortunate consequence: genuine accountability becomes nearly impossible, replaced instead by simplistic accusations that shut down nuanced dialogue rather than encouraging it.